much too complex, too complex, much too complex, too complex, too complex, too complex.
Good afternoon. My name is James K. Holder II. Some of you may know me as Sir James II, and I'd like to welcome you back to Not on My Watch. As always, I'd like to ask you to subscribe, like, comment, and share. I want you to retweet this and repeat this. We have a really big goal of reaching 1,000 subscribers by the end of the month, and so I'd like all of your help in getting there. Just click that button really quickly, and we'll be on our way. Once I get to 1,000 subscribers, I'll be able to sort of enable a few other features on the program, and then also I want to then release an audio-only version of this as a podcast. And a lot of you have been asking for that, but I definitely want to make sure that we have the viewership first before we sort of expand into something else. If you're watching, today is Wednesday, April 19th, 2017, and all over the weekend there were marches and there were protests. And there were all kinds of things going on in our country, many of which mimic the culture that we've seen since the election. And this was in particular related to tax day. As you know, everyone's taxes became due on Monday of this week. And it's of a particular significance this time around because we have a president who has not released his taxes. And so, of course, people were marching in opposition to that. I feel a little bit sort of indifferent to that whole position. Again, it's just like all of the other marches that you've seen. It's like, well, if you objected to, Trump not having released his taxes, you should have taken that position before you voted for him. As a general, I just think it's sort of electoral malpractice to vote for someone who has not released their taxes to you, because that person is going to be responsible for implementing a tax policy that you have to follow, or you'll get thrown in jail, or your wages will get garnished and all kind of stuff. But this person hasn't really shown you what their connections are, where their financial interests are, or anything like that. And so that, I think, is a lesson learned. Hopefully we've learned this moving forward, that this is something people won't do again. But I have no expectation or hope that Trump will voluntarily or involuntarily release his taxes to us. I just think there's too much in there that he wouldn't want known, and there's a reason why he hasn't shown it up until this point. But, by all means, keep trying. I don't think it's going to happen. One thing I'd like to discuss briefly is that there was an assault that took place in Berkeley, California, of a white supremacist. Many Trump supporters teamed up and planned these attacks on the tax day protesters. And what we have to be mindful of is that, one, this isn't new. This isn't something, the assaults on women were happening throughout the campaign. They were happening throughout the primaries, and you saw it happening at Trump rallies. At that time, it just happened to be women of color specifically. But, the misogynistic culture on both sides of the aisle, the assaults on women verbally, emotionally, physically, had been happening. And so we shouldn't really act surprised when this stuff happens. Absolutely doesn't mean it's acceptable. But what it does mean is that you have to be aware and cognizant of the fact that you're not dealing with people who are sympathetic to women. You're not dealing with people who are sympathetic to any situation. They really just are a unique type of person, and we are in a special time in our country, and we're dealing with special people. And so I advise you, if you continue to go out there and march and protest, that you do so, in full mind and view and willingness, and understanding that these sorts of things could happen. And so you really need to be in a mindset of protecting yourself. The resistance is real. As you know, the big discussion of the resistance has been this Georgia 6, the 6th Congressional District of Georgia race for Congress. Which featured Jon Ossoff, who is the front-running Democratic candidate, against a slew of Republicans. That race was last night, and in order to win the seat outright, Jon Ossoff would have had to have cleared the 50% mark. The numbers are still coming in as of the time that I'm reporting this to you, but he did not make that mark. It is very apparent that he won't make that 50% mark, but he came pretty close. I mean, for a district that had been held by Republicans for, I want to say, about 37 years straight, it is sort of interesting that amid a class of 12 nominees or candidates, that this one Democrat who's new on the scene, nice guy, did very, very well. Despite all of the shenanigans that we come to expect. There's more gerrymandering plans that had happened before this election. There were Trump robocalls. There was stealing of signs. There was a stealing of a voter machine that held the voter data of all Georgia voters, which includes me. So I'm looking out for that. But I just feel like our voting rights are under attack in this country, and they have been for a very long time. For a while, it was just if you were a black person, or if you were a woman, or if you fell in certain demographics, your voting rights were under attack. And what we're seeing now is that there's deliberate attempts to suppress the vote in general. It doesn't even matter who you might vote for, whether you're white or black. That the goal is just to suppress turnout. And I think that that's sad. But the reality is, we all need to be registered to vote. If you are of voting age and you're eligible, you need to register to vote immediately. Don't wait until a special election comes up. Don't wait until a deadline comes up. You've got to do this, and you've got to stay on top of it, period. Every single vote counts. And what you have to understand is that if you have a position on any issue, your vote matters. I mean, none of us are just lofting around in this world where however the wind blows, it won't affect us or the people around us that we care about or claim to care about. So we've got to be mindful of that, and we've got to really take this responsibility as citizens seriously. So I encourage all of you to make sure that you exercise your franchise every single time without exception. Because this vote was very close. It came down to within a few thousand votes. He could have been the outright winner, and instead, now he has to face a runoff, which happens in June. And with that only being one GOP candidate against him, it makes it a lot easier for the target to be placed on his back. And so it's unfortunate that he wasn't able to clear it outright, but I'm encouraged that he at least is in a runoff, and that we will see that race come to a head in less than 2 months. So look out for that. We've got to be focused and diligently attentive on winning that race, because that's crucial. So again, we had tons of energy, tons of support in Georgia. Ironically, who wasn't in Georgia? DNC Chairman Tom Perez. That is because he was too busy carrying the bags of the outreach chair for the Democratic Party, who happens to not be a Democrat, Bernie Sanders, on his Bernie, as I call it, the Bigot Whisperer tour, where he is no less than pushing his books and bashing Democrats every step of the way and talking about everything that we're doing wrong that he would have gotten right. I bring this up with lots of snark and attitude and shade because I want to be clear that there are two fights happening here. One is the fight against Donald Trump and making sure that at every step of the way, as this man works to strip Americans of our rights, of our abilities, of our justice, with his appointments of Betsy DeVos, who then appoints a civil rights chairperson within the Department of Education who doesn't believe in civil rights and thinks reverse racism is a thing. You've got Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, who is working to actively empower and embolden the police, on top of an ICE force to rid immigrants of specifically Mexican heritage of their rights. We really have to be focused on, we got to keep our eyes on the ball. So all this talk about what Democrats could have done better, how we got it wrong, that's secondary, if not third-dary. Like, fourth, fifth down the line of things that we need to focus on. Because as far as I'm concerned, the Progressive Coalition, which includes us, people of color, women, LGBT, disabled, Muslims, and there's more, along with those who don't fall into those categories of being a minority, but who care about us, we really need to be focused on our rights. We've got to be focused on the resistance as it relates to our rights in our daily lives. Because as far as I'm concerned, Donald Trump could be president for at least 8 years. And I say at least because knowing that fool, he'd been to change the entire Constitution to be able to keep him in until, you know, in perpetuity, and then one of his god-awful slack-jawed kids will take over the White House, and the Southern White House at Mar-a-Lago. So we've got to be really focused on, in that time, protecting our civil rights. That includes our voting rights. So if you don't exercise your rights, you will lose them. It's just like actual muscle. For those of you who go to the gym, you know that that's the case. One thing I have been incredibly sort of just fascinated by, and I don't say fascinated in a good way because I'm not enamored by this, but you know, and I've talked about this perspective that you continually get from mainstream media, one that only validates the position of the majority, and the majority in every sense. So if you're a straight white male, cisgender male, of means with access to education, the media is going to continually validate your position. It's going to continually validate your ideas. And what we've seen is that there's a lot of discrepancies with the way votes actually happen and the way you see polls turn out. Polls aren't really a good indicator when there's actual votes at the table to be discussed. And so on this Bigot Whisperer tour that Bernie Sanders has taken, where he's chosen to apologize for Trump voters and say that they're not really racist, they're not really sexist, they're not really homophobic, and that he understands them, and that we should work with them. I think he's been doing a lot of media spots and interviews. Just last night, I had to mute the television when he was on All In with Chris Hayes, which I think MSNBC should just change the title of that show to All In with Bernie Sanders, or as one of my followers on Twitter suggested, All In Bernie Sanders, and I'll leave that imagery to you. But it just kind of, it's one of those things where you constantly have the same narratives repeated over and over again that weren't really supported by any substantial number of votes. And so here I want to present an alternative in two forms. One, I want to just focus on who I see as the leader of the resistance. That is Representative Maxine Waters. Auntie Maxine has been a fierce challenger to Donald Trump. And in every step of the way, she has been focused solely on stopping Donald Trump, continually bringing up the ties to Russia from the beginning. She has been the #1 person on this issue. And so we cannot forget her. But I have some questions for Bernie. Because I've noticed that as he goes on this tour and as he's, lollygagging around everywhere in the country except Georgia, except Kansas, where there are actually races happening and promoting these candidates, he seems to be in a position to be somewhere else. And then when the Democrats don't win outright or don't completely change history by electing someone to a post that had been Republican run for decades, then we get the "I told you so" from Bernie. So, Bernie, who wasn't in Georgia last night, I just want to say that, and who also wasn't, Tom Perez, who was the leader of the Democratic. Let's just be clear. Tom Perez is not the leader of the resistance movement. And I think at some point, we have to begin to differentiate between the Democratic Party and the Democratic Party leadership specifically and the resistance movement. Because you've got people who aren't even politicians who are doing more against Donald Trump, like George Takei, and he's probably the #1 standout person who isn't a politician, who is just, and Rosie ODonnell. Kudos to Rosie O'Donnell. She has been the one-woman resistance since before Donald Trump was a thing. Before any of this happened, before it even got to that, Rosie O'Donnell was calling this man out for what he was. She let us know before he even tried to run for office the truth about this man. And so kudos to Rosie O'Donnell. There are so many who work on that side. And I think it's a shame that we keep having this discussion back and forth about, oh, well, Bernie Sanders is a distraction, and so is Tom Perez. We got to call that out for what it is. They can have a little dog and pony show on the side. When they're ready to be serious, they can join us over here where we're focused on Trump Russia, where we're focused on voting rights for all Americans, where we're focused on getting the people energized for protest and putting pressure on the GOP to actually resist supporting legislation like the repealing of Obamacare and replacing with nothing. That's got to be the key focus of the resistance movement. So with that said, I've noticed Bernie Sanders on All In with Bernie Sanders or All In Bernie Sanders on MSNBC. And for people, he keeps showing up on television and we're doing these puff pieces. He only really talks to friendly media. I love to see him get interviewed by somebody who's really like abreast of the issues, like a Joy Reid. That would be fantastic, but that's not going to happen. He only talks to Chris Hayes and sometimes Rachel Maddow when he feels like, she's not going to flip out on him. And so let's see. I have some questions for Bernie Sanders. So we're going to play 21 questions with Bernie Sanders. And I'm going to try to get to all 21, but it might not happen. And this is just for anyone in the media who happens to interview Bernie Sanders. If you feel like asking him any or all of these questions and actually getting answers, that would just be fantastic. Because, again, I'm sick of the same nonsense questions that you keep asking him and letting him get away with. And I'd love to get the perspective of the LGBT community, the disabled community, the Muslim community, the immigrant community, the people of color community, the base of the Democratic Party. I'd love to see us represented in the questions that you ask this man. So let me start. Here's 21 questions, any of which would be fantastic. Some are jokes, but most are serious. One, pimp, where are your taxes? It's 2017. So we should have a dossier from you of at least the last 30 years of your taxes. We got at least that much from the Clintons. You've been in office for 25, 26 years. So I don't understand why that is such an evasive topic for you. You released a 2014 summary of your taxes, which just simply is not good enough. You are someone who has scrutinized the finances of the Clinton family, all of them now, and your followers want to come after Chelsea for her money. They talk about Chelsea's wedding and all kind of stuff, and emails and everything dealing with the entire Clinton family, but we really don't know anything about you or Jane's taxes. I'd be specifically interested to know from 2011, when Jane walked away from, or took her golden parachute out of Burlington College after setting them on a trajectory to bankruptcy and closure, when she took her $200,000 severance pay, in addition to her $250,000 annual pay as president of Burlington College, I'd love to see what that tax return looked like from I guess it would have been 2012. Like the year that you filed in 2012 for 2011, because if I add it up, you make about $190,000, $200,000 a year, nice, comfortable, whatever, and then add that to her $450,000 windfall. Y'all had about $650,000, which coincidentally is about the same amount of money that you spent on your trip to stalk the Pope when the pressure got too hot for you in New York's primary. But that's me being shady. So where are those taxes? That would be fantastic. You promised them, never really delivered on them, and you used it so much to sort of attack Hillary Clinton and say that, you'll release your taxes when she releases her speeches, but at the end of the day, you only knew about her speeches because she had reported the income from the speeches in her taxes. So it begs the question, what do you have to hide? I don't think it's unfair to ask for Donald Trump's taxes as the leader of that party. And if you are the proclaimed leader of the Democrats, or you'd like to be, many of us would like to see that. And even though some of your diehard fans don't care, we care. So we need to see that. Question number 2. Why did you call for Barack Obama to face a primary opposition in 2012? Was the Affordable Care Act that unsuitable to you? Is it just because, you know, we've had multiple attempts to get universal health care in the form of single payer. They have not worked out. It is a difficult thing to pass. And in the meantime, there are provisions for people who face serious life challenges, whether they are disabled, mentally, physically, whether they have a pre-existing mental condition, whether they are prone to cancer, whether they are prone to any other heart disease or anything else. There are protections for those people. So I think many would describe that position that you took in that scene as reckless, because had someone primaried Barack Obama and had something actually come up that would have weakened him against a subsequent general election race, we would have had 4 years of Obama followed by 4 years of Romney, or 8 years of Romney, and that's where we would be now. We wouldn't really be anywhere farther towards pushing the progressive ball for anyone who faced the onslaught. And I think that's really careless on your part. But I'd like to know why, and maybe that just had to do with echoing more of Trump. Maybe there's something about Barack Obama that you just don't like. I'd also be interested to know why you didn't just primary Barack Obama. Why weren't you up to the task of doing that? Throwing it out there. 3, during the primary, you held Clinton to a very high standard in your fight for $15 an hour federal minimum wage. And yet once Trump was elected, you immediately dropped to $10 an hour, which we still haven't received. We haven't seen legislation from you, or a bill or anything in the form of $15 an hour, $12 an hour, $10 an hour. Why was 15 so much of a necessity to be held to Hillary Clinton, but as soon as Donald Trump became president, you then were able to coalesce around 10, which again, you're not going to get, and we're not going to get now. I'd be interested to know why the double standard existed for Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. 4, Washington Post this week released posted an article that said racism motivated Trump voters more than authoritarianism. This runs contrary to your position that Trump voters actually aren't racist or homophobic or bigoted or sexist. We know it's nonsense. We know it's white nonsense. And in your quest to, get these voters on your side or build your political capital, I really feel as though the denial of racism and sexism is a vile position. Where it exists, we all are called to recognize it and reject it every single time. There is no place for accepting of racism, accepting of homophobia. That's just a non-starter. And so now, I asked it as a question, but I'm telling you that you're wrong, and I'm supporting it with evidence from the Washington Post that you can go read yourself. I know you're not really big on reading articles because, sometimes people say things and you don't really follow up. You just kind of fly off the handle and respond. But I'd suggest that you read that because it's proof that racism did play a major role and that your quest to pander on your bigot whispering tour is sort of fruitless. But kudos on getting your sugar daddy Tom Perez to pay for half of it. Question number 5. During the primary, you objected to closed primaries, which ensure the integrity of party nominations. If you'll remember, the state of West Virginia went for you in the primary, despite the fact that you were down in the polls. And many of the respondents who voted for you said that they were actually Trump supporters. This is coincidentally because West Virginia had an open primary, and Donald Trump had previously, the week before, sealed the nomination for the Republican Party. So Republicans had no need to vote in their own nomination process, so they just crossed over and voted for you, despite the fact that they had all said in West Virginia, not all, but most said that they were going to vote for Donald Trump anyway. This is why we have closed primaries. Because if the other party seals up their fate beforehand, we're kind of toast because we're open to sabotage. let me finish the question. Yet when it came to the caucus system, you had no issue with the caucus system, even though, the caucus system is a nightmare for people in marginalized communities, because you have this situation where vocal people who are men and typically straight men, alpha men, and let's vote for this person. Let's support this person. I've never been to a caucus. I don't know that I would go to a caucus, because if somebody rolled up on me like you had Susan Sarandon roll up on Dolores Huerta, I might be locked under a jail somewhere. So I'm just saying, the caucus system isn't for everybody. How do you see this reconciling in 2020? If you're playing a major role in how the democratic process works out in the future, where do you see caucuses and closed primaries in the future? Are you willing to are you willing to support all open primaries if you're willing to also coalesce to the idea and fact that caucuses are inherently undemocratic and make it harder for women, people of color, the disabled, people who work on weekends and evenings, harder to vote, which tend to be poorer people, which tend to be people of color? So let's just throw that out there. 6, are you a Democrat? The answer is no, because you answered that on All In with Bernie Sanders last night. 7, why not? I don't even care, bruh. 8, why didn't you raise money down ballot during the primary? Now, we know that you picked a few candidates, all of whom lost, that you supported, including Tim Canova, who lost against Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and I'm not going to say what y'all called her, but that was just really unfortunate. And I wonder where we would be as a party if more attention had been given from both candidates running in the Democratic primary for the nomination, had worked to support and raise funds for down ballot races throughout the entire 2016. Just something to think about. 9. Why won't you share your email list with Democrats? Many people are saying that it's because since you stole so much voter data from Hillary Clinton in December of 2015, you really wouldn't want to showcase that there was so much overlap between your two lists. I'm not saying that that's the case, but it's a possibility. Number 10, but you could also release the list and then we could see for ourselves. Number 10, Cornel West referred to Obama as a niggerized president. Why did you include him on your platform committee? It just seemed like it was a petty little catty move to throw shade at Barack Obama. Following his involvement on the platform committee at before the DNC, the convention this past summer, he endorsed Jill Stein, who pulled enough votes in swing states to effectively elect Donald Trump by, kneecapping Hillary Clinton. Why didn't you take a more forceful stand against that position? Seeing as how you had empowered Cornel West as a Democratic voice by putting him as a proxy to you on your platform committee, why didn't you then say, I don't support his endorsement of Jill Stein? That's just something I'd be eager to know, because I think a lot of people who previously supported you took that as a sign, as a blessing, for them to go on and vote for Jill Stein. Even though you didn't necessarily endorse Jill Stein yourself, that Cornel West endorsement sort of by proxy became your voice as it was on the platform committee. Question number 12. What's your favorite color? What's your favorite movie? That's 12 and 13. And if the answer is anything other than the color purple, you're wrong. 14. Dude, why are you in ice cream? Like, you over the weekend, you tweeted this picture of you stripping out of a Ben & Jerry's ice cream tub. And I just got to say that the optics were, 1, hilarious, 2, just corny as hell. And I don't understand. When Ben & Jerry's is this ice cream manufacturer, it's a creamery, and it seems innocent on its head, but really they're owned by a multinational corporation, a conglomerate, Unilever. So how is you being photographed with half of the pixels of this photo are dedicated to publishing this brand that you are obviously approving of, and you posted it voluntarily to your Twitter feed? You're effectively acting as a spokesman for Ben & Jerry's, who supported you during the primary. Now, they named the ice cream flavor after you. I don't know what it tasted like. I don't want to know what it tasted like. But at the end of the day, how is that not one of those nefarious special interest quid pro quo situations that you frequently talk about? I'd be interested to know. 15. You had several surrogates take a strong anti-black stance against Hillary Clinton for the '94 crime bill. Meaning, a lot of your surrogates, including Killer Mike, Ben Jealous, Nina Turner, I'm blanking, but there were several key. Michelle Alexander. You really had these people out there in full force, talking about how vile and how culpable Hillary Clinton was for the '94 crime bill that her husband Bill Clinton signed into law after a majority of our House and Senate, including you were a member of the House at that point, and you voted for that legislation. Why is it that Hillary Clinton was such a target of your surrogates, but you weren't? And question 16, why have you never apologized for that vote? You know, like, we hold Hillary Clinton to the fire, me included. Like, she didn't vote for the bill, but she did make comments 2 years later that were objectionable, and she's apologized for them, and I accepted her apology, as did many other black voters. Why haven't you apologized for that vote? I'd be very interested to know. Number 17, you recently stated that Dems should consider electing pro-life and pro-Second Amendment candidates. Are you fucking kidding me? I mean, can we just talk about the confluence of enabling, one, kneecapping women's rights, but then also endangering women against their spouses, knowing that, as we talked about last week, domestic violence is a serious issue. When it comes to gun violence, there is a considerable link between domestic violence and gun violence in this country. And many women meet their end because their husbands are insecure or for whatever reason, decide to take their lives. In murder-suicides, we see it all the time. How do you not see that there is a deplorable correlation between these two things that can't be supported by the Democratic Party if we want to be the party of women? That's my question for you. Question number 18. What responsibility, if any, do you take for the rigged narrative that the Russians used to hack the election? I'll let you answer that question on your own. 19. Sexism and misogyny in your campaign. For example, Paul Song's use of the term whore in front of your largest crowd at a college campus, no less, in New York, to describe Hillary Clinton. I mean, he said it wasn't to describe Hillary Clinton, but we all know that's what it was. Your unqualified remark that same week, and just the threats against women in Democratic leadership like Roberta Lang. I believe she was from Nevada. That's how you properly pronounce that state. What would you do differently, if anything? Do you really feel any remorse? I mean, you kind of walk back some of those harsher statements, but really the problem was still there because it kept happening. I mean, after Paul Song's whore comment, you later had your minions going out throwing dollar bills at Hillary Clinton's motorcade. So, what's to be said about that? Question number 20. Are you concerned about the racist and sexist culture adopted by your followers? Many of them used harsh language towards people of color, really sort of demoralizing and paternalistically racist positions on issues of the white savior. Many view you as a white savior, which is one of the most racist and reprehensible figures in white supremacy. Not my words, but many of your followers also follow that mantra, which is that, oh, black people really don't know what's good for them. We're telling you, you should support this person. You owe Bernie Sanders your vote because he marched for your rights with Dr. Martin Luther King, and so you owe him your vote. That was a lot of the culture that came from your campaign. So I'd be interested to know if you're concerned about that, because you really haven't spoken out much about it. Lastly, question number 21. Speaking of that, there's always been this parallel between Dr. Martin Luther King and you, saying that you marched for Dr. Martin Luther King, but he himself said that voting rights was the #1 civil right. So where do you stand on voting rights for African Americans? Where do you stand on civil rights for African Americans? You know, we've seen you take this position against identity politics, which seems to be a fairly popular position among white, straight, cisgender men who aren't worried about being able to get married next year, who aren't worried about being able to afford basic necessities, who aren't worried about being discriminated against for a job or for an apartment. And yet many of us who don't fall into that category of privilege have to be concerned about our rights when it comes to pursuing basic needs and necessities in this country. So I'd be interested to know where your position is on that. I got to tell you, it really, that was probably the most offensive aspect of your entire campaign. That constant parading of Dr. Martin Luther King. And there's something about this juxtaposition of Dr. King and saying that his fight, his sacrifice, his giving of his life for the protection of my right to vote now means I owe you deference in terms of a vote. I think it's quite literally as low as you can go. I think it's really, really low, and I really would like you to answer for that, because I think many were offended by that. Many people who support you continually push that narrative, as disgusting as it is, and as we've called you out for it, but it's still there. So maybe you might speak to that, because, you know, we've seen a couple pictures. Some of them were you, some of them weren't you. You know, I don't know that you was in Selma in 1965. We know you was at the March of Washington in 1963, but there's pictures of you marching in Selma that people swear was you. And, you know, you say you weren't there, so who knows? I would like clarification on that. Last but not least, of course, I'd like to thank our friends of the show. And I got to tell y'all, I'm so excited about this week. This was a record week for us. We had 6 supporters of the show, and including 1 repeat supporter. And so just to go down the line, we have Bianca S. from Greenfield Park, Quebec, Canada. That's our first international contributor. We have Gabrielle D. from Lauderhill, Florida, our first repeat supporter. We've got Victoria A. from Sterling Heights, Michigan. Shout out to Michigan. We've got Susan O. from Novato, California. We've got Ellen B. from Scottsdale, Arizona. And lastly, we've got Michael M. from somewhere in the UK. And I only happen to know that because the donation came over in Great British pounds for some reason. So thank you for all of your support. I really appreciate it. And again, if you donate $1, it helps me buy coffee for this show. If you donate more than $1, it helps me buy more coffee for the show, or something else to help improve the program itself. So thank you for the support. I'm so humbled by the support in the show. And if you'd like to become a friend of the show by making a donation, you can do so at paypal.me/JKH2. So with that, it has been a trying week for the resistance, but I want you to remain focused. And as always, I want to invite you to relax, relate, and resist. Until next time, thank you.
Too complex.